In 2008, the global financial system, well, it nearly collapsed entirely under the weight of toxic assets.
Right, a total meltdown.
Exactly. And then just a few years later, the aviation industry was completely rocked when those Boeing 737 MX jets began falling out of the sky.
Which is still just, terrifying to think about.
It really is. But in both of those catastrophic, history-altering events, investigations revealed something incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, the internal communications.
Right. There were people on the front lines, engineers, analysts, mid-level managers who knew exactly what was going wrong. They saw the red flags.
And they said nothing.
They said absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So today we are taking a deep dive into the invisible psychological forts that kept their mouths shut.
It's such a crucial topic.
It really is. We have a brilliant article by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover today titled The High Cost of Workplace Inauthenticity. And, his research completely flips the script on how we understand our jobs.
It really does. It changes the whole narrative.
Yeah, so the mission of this deep dive is to explore the massive hidden costs of pretending to be someone else at work and discover how the world's most successful organizations are structurally fixing it. So think about your own career for a second. We usually assume people quit over, bad pay or grueling hours. Right?
That's a standard assumption, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this because Westover's core premise is that the real breaking point isn't the workload, it's the gap between who you actually are and who you have to pretend to be to survive in the office.
It completely reframes our understanding of burnout, honestly. Looking at my notes here, organizational behavior researchers refer to this phenomenon as identity incongruence.
Identity incongruence.
Right. It's that exhausting, sustained state where an individual feels compelled to suppress their own values, their core beliefs, or, their ethical boundaries, just to maintain their employment.
Which sounds completely draining.
Oh, absolutely. What's fascinating here is that we aren't just talking about demographic diversity, though. I mean, that is a component.
Right, there's more to it.
We're talking about deep-seated personal values and professional judgment. It is the friction that occurs when your environment demands that you perform a version of yourself that fundamentally clashes with reality.
Right, but to really grasp how damaging this friction is, I think we need to talk about what this actually looks like for you, the listener, on a random Tuesday morning at the office.
Yeah, the day-to-day experience.
Exactly, because I have to imagine practically everyone listening to this has forced a polite smile in a really frustrating meeting. I mean, is that what we're talking about here?
Well, the research actually makes a vital distinction there. It separates everyday politeness from actual psychological damage.
Oh, okay. How so?
There's a researcher named Hewlin who categorized this behavior into two distinct buckets. The first is called surface acting.
Surface acting, like the polite smile.
Exactly, that polite smile you just mentioned. You're modifying your outward expressions, maybe softening your tone or nodding along, while your internal authenticity remains perfectly intact.
Right, you're just being polite.
Yeah, it's functional. It's basically a requirement for existing in a cooperative society.
Sure.
The second category, however, is what she terms facades of conformity.
Facades of conformity. That sounds heavier.
It is. This is where an employee actively misrepresents their core beliefs or their professional judgment just to align with the perceived demands of the organization.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. According to Hewlin's research, an astonishing 50% of employees report engaging in these facades.
50%, half the workforce.
Half the workforce.
That is wild. But, I mean, if we look at the reality of corporate life, isn't a little bit of faking it just the definition of being a professional?
Yeah.
Like, to use an analogy, surface acting feels like putting on that standard customer service smile when you're tired. But what you're describing with a facade of conformity, that sounds less like a polite smile and more like undergoing a daily personality transplant.
That's a great way to put it, actually. The distinction between a polite smile and a personality transplant gets right to the heart of the issue. A customer service smile is temporary. It's situational. But when you are forced into a facade of conformity, it creates a psychological state that researchers call threatened social identities.
Threatened social identity. So it's
Right.
about feeling unsafe.
Exactly. This isn't about simply wanting to be liked by your boss. It is a primal survival mechanism. An employee in this state genuinely fears devaluation, marginalization, or, outright termination if they were to express their true self.
So it's basically driven by fear.
Pure fear. Imagine an environment that requires you to laugh at offensive humor that you find deeply appalling. Or, worse, forces you to stay quiet when you watch a critical safety protocol being ignored.
Like the Boeing example.
Exactly. At that point, self-presentation is no longer about professionalism. It becomes a direct threat to your psychological integrity.
Man, when you spend 40 or 50 hours a week suppressing your core identity like that, that friction has to go somewhere.
It definitely does. It doesn't just vanish.
Because the human brain simply cannot sustain that kind of pressure indefinitely. So what happens when these masks inevitably start to crack?
Well, the very first thing to break is the individual. The cost is paid in severe psychological distress.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, the data shows skyrocketing rates of emotional exhaustion, anxiety, and a really heavy phenomenon known as moral distress.
Moral distress.
Yeah, that is the deep, lingering psychological injury you sustain when you're forced to participate in, or even just ignore actions that violate your own ethical code.
Wow, that's heavy.
Over time, this constant suppression leads to identity fragmentation. The individual literally loses connection with their core self because they've spent the majority of their waking life actively denying it.
That sounds absolutely debilitating on a personal level.
It really is.
But I would imagine, purely from a cynical corporate perspective, the company might think, hey, the employee is still showing up and playing the game.
Right, the as long as the work gets done mentality.
Exactly. So does playing that game at least pay off for their career?
You think so, but this is where we see a fascinating and somewhat tragic paradox in the data. A study by Cable and colleagues found that suppressing your identity actually makes you significantly less promotable.
Wait, less promotable?
Yep.
That seems totally backward. You would assume that conforming perfectly to the exact corporate mold the company wants would put you on the fast track to leadership.
It totally seems counterintuitive until you look at the mechanics of cognitive load.
Okay, cognitive load. Walk me through that.
Well, maintaining a complex facade requires immense constant mental energy. It is an active, ongoing process of self-monitoring.
Constantly watching your step.
Right. Every ounce of brain power an employee spends policing their tone, hiding their values, or feigning agreement, that is energy they cannot use for creative problem-solving, strategic thinking, or going above and beyond.
Oh, wow. So they're just running out of mental RAM.
Exactly. Consequently, they become less distinct, less innovative, and ultimately less effective in their actual roles.
And I imagine this doesn't just hurt the one employee. If half the people in an office are utterly exhausted just trying to fit in, what does that do to the company itself?
The organizational damage is staggering. The text points to a massive drop in what researchers call organizational citizenship behaviors.
What are those exactly?
Those are the voluntary extra-mile actions that make companies great. Mentoring a junior colleague, pitching a wild new idea, or just staying late to fix a bug no one else noticed.
The stuff that isn't strictly in the job description.
Exactly. When people are exhausted by conformity, those behaviors vanish entirely. And on top of that, organizations that fail to support authenticity suffer a 20% higher voluntary turnover rate.
20%?
Yeah, the talent simply leaves.
Which brings us back to the people who stay, and those massive disasters we talked about at the very beginning. The financial crisis, the Boeing 737 MA.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, an organization that demands strict conformity is systematically dismantling its own early warning systems.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it creates a terrifying phenomenon called organizational silence. In those catastrophic events you mentioned, the people positioned closest to the failure understood the risks perfectly well.
But they didn't speak up.
Because the organizational culture framed dissent, or even just delivering bad news, as a threat to their employment or social standing. So they withheld the information.
It's like a homeowner deciding to turn off all their smoke alarms just because a little blinking light is annoying to look at.
That is exactly it.
I mean, the house feels incredibly peaceful and quiet right up until the moment the roof caves in from the fire.
The smoke alarm metaphor illustrates the danger perfectly. When leadership signals that bringing bad news is a career-limiting move, the workforce learns to simply sit back and watch the smoke gather. They entirely disengage their professional judgment.
So we have to pause here and ask a really uncomfortable question.
Okay.
If this culture of inauthenticity causes widespread burnout, stunts careers, drives away top talent, and literally causes multi-billion-dollar history-altering catastrophes, why are so many companies still actively creating environments that demand it?
It's a great question. And it's rarely a conscious, malicious choice by leadership.
Really?
Yeah. It is typically the byproduct of systemic power asymmetries combined with homogeneous leadership teams.
Okay, homogeneous leadership.
When a leadership group lacks cognitive or demographic diversity, they naturally and often unconsciously develop really rigid, implicit norms. A landmark study by Phillips and Lloyd found that homogeneous groups exert drastically stronger conformity pressure than diverse groups.
So they just naturally push people to fit in.
Right, they punish dissent far more severely because difference feels like an attack on their shared reality. It creates an echo chamber.
Oh, that makes sense.
And when you mix that echo chamber with toxic social norms, like subtly disrespecting junior staff or normalizing boundary violations, you construct an ecosystem where raising any objection immediately paints a target on your back.
So if you are listening to this and you realize your own team never speaks up during meetings, it's not because everyone you work with is inherently cowardly.
Not at all.
It's because the environment itself has been perfectly calibrated to punish the truth.
Yes. The silence is actually a highly rational response to an irrational, dangerous environment.
Wow.
This ties directly into Harvard professor Amy Edmondson's concept of psychological safety. Now, psychological safety isn't about just being nice or lowering standards.
Right, it's not about coddling people.
Exactly. It is the shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Edmondson's research shows that lower status members of a hierarchy are acutely aware of these risks, and they're the most likely to self-silence.
Because they have the most to lose.
Right, and this climate is entirely dictated by leadership. If a CEO or a director shows ethical ambiguity or gets defensive when a junior analyst questions a metric, that fear cascades instantly down the entire organizational chart.
Which means telling employees to just be braver is completely useless.
Completely useless.
The fix has to start at the top. We have to dismantle the fear. And the deep dive gives us some incredible evidence-based blueprints for how the best companies actually do this, starting with leadership vulnerability and procedural justice.
Vulnerability from leadership is the foundational requirement here. You cannot mandate authenticity. You have to model it.
Right.
A prime example from the text is Pixar's Brain Trust. Have you heard of this?
A little bit, yeah.
So when filmmakers at Pixar hit a roadblock, they present their raw, unfinished work to a room of their peers. The explicit goal is to receive candid, often brutal, rigorous criticism.
Which sounds terrifying.
It does. But the mechanism that makes it work is that senior leaders attend these sessions as peers, not as bosses.
Right.
They literally leave their titles at the door.
Oh, wow.
They model receptivity to criticism and openly acknowledge their own uncertainties. That proves to the entire room that rank does not protect anyone's ideas from scrutiny.
And Microsoft underwent a massive transformation under Satya Nadella doing something very similar, right?
Yes, exactly.
He shifted the entire corporate culture away from a know-it-all mindset to a learn-it-all mindset, where leaders were actually expected to admit what they didn't know.
It's a huge shift.
It is. Then you have companies like Patagonia, where leadership actively models values-based decision-making. They have literally turned down highly profitable business ventures because those deals conflicted with their environmental commitments.
Which is putting your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. Seeing the CEO take a financial hit for their values gives every single employee permission to do the exact same thing.
Those cultural shifts are so powerful, but culture alone is fragile. Alongside vulnerable leaders, you need rigorous systems, which brings us to the concept of procedural justice.
Procedural justice sounds very formal.
It does, but it just refers to the perceived fairness of the decision-making processes within a company. Take Salesforce, for example.
Okay.
When they committed to tackling their gender pay gap, they didn't just quietly adjust some numbers in HR. They conducted organization-wide, highly transparent audits.
Oh, so everyone could see.
Yes. They established clear, visible criteria for how adjustments would be made and created formal appeal mechanisms. And then the social media company, Buffer, took this concept to its absolute limit.
What did they do?
They published a radical public salary formula based strictly on role, experience, and location. Every employee knows exactly how everyone else's pay is calculated.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I look at Buffer's public salary formula almost like open source software.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. When the underlying code of a decision like the math is visible to absolutely everyone, there is no dark corner for paranoia to grow.
Exactly.
There is no room for identity threat because you never have to sit at your desk wondering if you're being undervalued because of your gender, your background, or your personality. The math is right there on the screen.
The open source comparison works perfectly because it highlights predictability. Research consistently shows that procedural justice, knowing the underlying process is fair and transparent, predicts an employee's willingness to use their voice.
Even if they don't get what they want.
Yes, even in situations where they actually disagree with the final outcome. People don't require that they get their way every single time. What they require is the knowledge that the game isn't rigged against them.
That is such a crucial distinction.
When the criteria for success and failure are transparent, advocating for yourself or raising a dissenting opinion is no longer a personal identity-level risk. It is just business conversation.
Okay, but as great as transparent leaders and fair processes are, the research takes a fascinating turn here.
It does.
Because nice leaders and good intentions are great on a Tuesday when everything is fine. But when millions of dollars are on the line or a deadline is looming, good intentions evaporate.
They vanish.
Organizations actually need structural armor. They need hard, built-in operational mechanisms that literally force dissent into the open, regardless of how the manager feels about it.
Structural armor ensures that authenticity doesn't require an employee to be a martyr. It operationalizes dissent. A fascinating example is the hedge fund Bridgewater Associates. They utilize a system for thoughtful disagreement, supported by a proprietary tool called the dot collector.
The dot collector?
Yeah, during meetings, employees use iPads to literally rate each other's reasoning and logic in real time, completely irrespective of hierarchy.
Wait, really?
Yes. A junior analyst can grade the CEO's logic as flawed, and it goes right on the board.
That is incredible.
Google also utilized the findings from their massive Project Aristotle to create specific behavioral scripts for their teams. They gave managers exact, standardized language to navigate disagreements productively, ensuring that psychological safety was baked right into the workflow. It wasn't left to chance.
The structural armor that really blew my mind, though, was the nursing example, the SBI protocols.
Oh, yeah.
Which stands for Situation, Background, Assessment, Recommendation.
Right.
The medical field is incredibly hierarchical, and nurses have historically been silenced by aggressive doctors. So the industry trained nurses to use this specific, rigid communication structure. When a nurse sees a doctor making a mistake, they don't have to mount a personal challenge. They just initiate an SBR. It completely depersonalizes the conflict.
Takes the ego out of it entirely.
Exactly. IBM did something similar by creating formal distinguished engineer roles where challenging executive technical decisions is literally the job description.
Yeah.
The VA instituted massive systemic whistleblower protections. It is all about building systems where the truth is structurally safe to speak.
The protocols and roles are vital, but the ultimate structural armor, and perhaps the most counterintuitive finding in this entire body of organizational research, comes down to financial and career security.
Okay, I'm listening.
Specifically, it is the power of the exit. Organizations that want to cultivate true, unvarnished authenticity actually have to make it incredibly safe for their people to leave.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the logic here.
Sure.
To get employees to be deeply authentic, fully engaged, and fiercely committed to the company's success. Companies like Netflix and major teaching hospitals are actively building systems to help them leave.
This raises an important question about the nature of human agency.
Yeah, because it sounds crazy.
It sounds like a total contradiction, I know. But consider the mechanics of conformity we discussed earlier with the facades. Identity suppression intensifies precisely when people feel trapped. When an employee perceives they have no alternative employment options, or they fear imminent financial ruin, their mask gets superglued to their face.
Because they have to survive.
Exactly. Netflix counters this by paying top-of-market salaries and offering incredibly generous severance packages if things don't work out. LinkedIn aggressively promotes internal mobility and maintains strong, supportive alumni networks for people who move on to other companies.
That's fascinating.
Some major teaching hospitals have even begun providing confidential exit counseling for doctors who are experiencing deep moral distress. They actively help them transition to different practices without ruining their careers.
Because if you are sitting at your desk, terrified of losing your livelihood and unable to pay your mortgage, you will say whatever the boss wants you to say.
He'll say anything.
You will fake the quarterly numbers, you will ignore the glaring safety hazard on the factory floor, and you will bury your true self just to survive.
Absolutely.
But if you know you have a safety net, if you know you can walk away tomorrow with your dignity and your finances totally intact, suddenly the calculation changes.
It completely flips.
You don't have to lie anymore.
When you remove the desperation, choices become genuine. A worker's voice becomes truly authentic. That frontline engineer speaks up about the fatal flaw in the airplane design because they aren't terrified that their family will starve if management fires them for it.
Right.
Organizations that provide this level of security are not pushing their talent out the door. They are removing the paralyzing fear of the door. And in doing so, they unlock the most honest, innovative, and dedicated work out of the people who freely choose to stay.
So what does this all mean? If you take all these notes, all these case studies from Google and Pixar, the SBIR protocols, and the research on cognitive load, it points to one inescapable conclusion.
It does.
Workplace authenticity is not some soft luxury HR buzzword reserved for corporate retreats.
No, not at all.
It is a hard, measurable, strategic imperative. It is the literal difference between a team that innovates and a team that stagnates. It is the difference between catching a fatal flaw in an airplane design and letting it go to market because nobody wanted to accept the project manager.
Exactly right.
You shouldn't have to quit the person you are just to survive your job. And the organizations that actually understand that, the ones building the structural armor to protect their people's true identities, are the ones that are going to win the future.
The organizational implications are clear, and they are heavily supported by the data. But, if we zoom out one final time, beyond the corporate structures and profit margins, there's a lingering thought that this research provokes.
What's that?
We have established that the average adult spends the vast majority of their waking life at work. If those workplaces continually force individuals to suppress their true identities, to habitually silence their ethical concerns, and to ignore their own boundaries just to secure their livelihood,
Yeah.
what happens to a society when its most vital civic and democratic institutions are eventually run by people who have spent decades practicing how not to be themselves?